This episode of Word Balloon is brought to you by Alex Ross Art. Go to the website alexrossart.com and you will find original signed comics, prints, great items, not only in the world of comics, but also if you're a Monkey fan, a David Bowie fan, a Monty Python fan, among other great media stars, with the Alex Ross touch in incredible prints, lithographs, and other great items. A great price range of items, too, from $50 to high-end, one-of-a-kind things as well. You'll want to check out for your favorite comic book fans, Alex Ross Art. He has one-of-a-kind, timeless Marvel prints based on his covers, the variant covers for the Marvel Timeless event. There are lithographs from the DC Universe and Marvel Universe, solo shots, group shots, incredible things at a price you can afford. Check it all out at alexrossart.com. Hi, everybody. Welcome back. It's Word Balloon, the comic book conversation show. John Suntress here. I've been talking all year to Ed Brubaker, and it's always a pleasure. Ed gets busy, and sometimes I don't hear from him for literally years. But, with COVID and everything, he had to kind of restructure his and Sean Phillips and Jacob Phillips' business plan on how they were releasing their books. And it's been a very successful experiment. He and Marcos Martin started Friday and did it through Panel Syndicate. Then, of course, Pulp came out in the summer. Now, it was delayed because of COVID by about 3 months. So he saw what he perceived to be a little bit of a dip in their success in the way that they had been releasing Criminal as a monthly comic first and then a graphic novel. And if you've been listening to Word Balloon, you know that they decided to instead start releasing things purely as graphic novels. Now, Pulp was a novella that never was going to be broken up into issues. And Friday is a issue-by-issue, digitally released first. And he talks a bit today about the plans for releasing Friday as a graphic novel. But with Reckless, his new book that's out today, always meant to be an original graphic novel, straight up. 148 pages of content, great process stuff in there, great script stuff, beautiful work and process work from Sean in the art department. But the story is just a great 70s men's adventure, tough guy story that would fit very well in the Criminal universe, but as Ed says, slightly different head writing Reckless compared to the Criminal books. So, really fun conversation. I can't wait to share it with you. It is Ed Brubaker talking about the release of Reckless that came out today, and it's a great conversation. We don't spoil a thing, I promise you, but it's a great book, and I can't recommend it enough. Ed Brubaker, Reckless, both the book and the business motive, on today's Word Balloon. Word Balloon is brought to you by the League of Word Balloon listeners. Thank you greatly, League, for your support via Patreon, patreon.com/wordballoon. Subscribing to Word Balloon really helps out the show. It allows me to innovate as I've been doing this year, creating the video channel on YouTube, and this has really helped me out in keeping the lights on here at wordballoon.com. Word Balloon is free. It'll always be free. But if you want to help out the cause, consider subscribing to Word Balloon via Patreon, patreon.com. Word Balloon is also brought to you by Aftershock Comics. It is celebrating the work of Cullen Bunn this month. All My Little Demons is a Cullen Bunn omnibus collecting a lot of his great creator-owned work that he has put together for Aftershock Comics, including the Brothers Dracul, the full series. There's Dark Ark After the Flood 1 through 5, Knights Temporal 1 through 5, Unholy Grail 1 through 5, the original graphic novel Witchhammer, Bloodlines from Shock Volume 1, and Man, I Am Evil, Dude, from Shock Volume 2. Lots of great supernatural stories from Cullen Bunn, great creator-owned stuff from Aftershock Comics, and not only that, but also great series that are underway, things like Kaiju Score. We got the second issue of that coming out at the end of the month. Sympathy for No Devils from Brandon Thomas also coming out at the end of the month, December 30th. And just underway, great books like the Spy series from Stephanie Phillips, Red Atlantis, and the graphic novel Kill a Man from Steve Orlando, Philip Kennedy, and Al Morgan. Don't forget, you can find great books at Aftershock Comics. You'll find amazing genre-bending ideas from some of the top creators out there. Check it out for yourself. Go to their website, aftershockcomics.com. All right, he's back. He promised he'd be back by the end of the year. He's got a new graphic novel out with Sean Phillips and Jacob, of course. Ed Brubaker, welcome back to Word Balloon.
Thanks for having me.
Hey, man, you guys delivered. Reckless is fantastic. It's out on Wednesday. We're recording this the day before it comes out, and you were kind enough to send me the PDF, and you delivered, man. It's exactly what you described in the best possible way. It's a fantastic, incredibly dense story, a great read, and people that are noir fans. It's set in the 70s, but it certainly does have a very traditional feeling of it. It's definitely of its era.
Yeah.
But there are certainly callbacks to classic noir tropes. Just put in a post-Vietnam context.
Yeah. That was like the idea. Was I was looking at all those. Sometimes I'll just stumble upon these like websites that where like artists just find like old book covers and just get scans of them and just continually like put up cool old ones. And I can spend hours just looking through old like 50s or 60s or 70s book covers. And like, I can't remember the name of the site. There's like a great old one, and they'll often find like a bunch of them by like Mitchell Hooks, where they'll have like 40 Mitchell Hooks covers, and you can see all the different eras they all went through. And like there was one day where they had like covers from all these different series characters from the 60s and 70s, and I just remembered seeing so many of them as a kid when we go to like the Fed Mart or the Pick and Save or something, and my dad would be looking for something boring, and I'd go over to like the spin racks with all the lurid, the Penetrator and the Executioner and
Yes.
Mac Bull and the Destroyer. And like, I think I only read a few of those, but I remember my dad having like books that were sort of playing on that. Like my dad would buy all the James Bonds, and, it seemed like almost from the late 60s through the like mid to late 70s, like any kind of series character, there were paperbacks with like these cool montage covers that they promised often like way more sex and violence than was actually in the book, though not in like the Executioner or something like that. But so it was like early days of the pandemic, and I was looking at all these covers, and I just started thinking like how nothing in comics had really been done like that for a long time, even though someone like the Punisher was like directly inspired by like the Executioner,
Absolutely.
And, comics obviously is like serialized heroes. A lot of, 80% of what we consider mainstream comics is like, grown out of that pulp fiction thing. But I thought it was interesting that like, other than what Darwin did with the Parker books, no one in American comics had really just done like a straight like pulp paperback, like hero kind of book. And, it's like in Europe, there's a ton of character series where they'll have like a book or two a year come out, but they're like 40 pages or whatever. And they have characters like Black Sad, and, they've been, that's sort of how they serve, their comic market has thrived like that. But it really did feel like a missing thing here, and Darwin's books were adaptations of, pre-existing pulp novels, which I had, and I loved all that. And I remember always being really jealous of those books because they just looked so good. And when you walked into the store and you saw this like Parker graphic novel by Darwin Cook, you were just like, holy shit, here's like a, 150 page like comic by like one of the best people ever. And it's with a character I love. And I started like going online and buying like old paperbacks, and like I'd only read like a couple of the Travis McGee books, but that was one of my dad's favorites, and so I like ordered all of them because I'm like, fuck it, I'm going to read them all right through from like beginning to end. And I've been jumping around in them actually because like I've read the first few and I was like, I could see why they're such a big deal, but like so much of what came after them was influenced by them that they almost feel a little like dated, and they're also incredibly sexist. Like they're super ahead of the curve on like the environmental stuff, but like, especially in the early books, I read one of the later ones like last week, and I found like he'd grown out of a lot of that stuff as he went along. But like the ones from the early 60s, when he put out like the first 3 books in like the first like 6 months or something, like there's literally one of those where like McGee goes to meet a client and thinks that he might not want to take her case because she's not hot enough. And I was like, wow. And here he is lecturing me about the environment. So I was like, I kind of want to read them through and see, as he goes through like the 70s, does he become a little bit more hip to the women's movement and stuff. But yeah, what I was really like captured by there was just like, you could read one of these in like a day or two, and they really it was just like fun escapism. But like the times when he did talk about like the environment, it's like in the Lou Archer books, McDonald's always like, there's always some other theme going on under there that's like, you know, it's like some weird mystery that's like about an edible complex, but it's also like takes place during like a wildfire, you know, and I just really found myself being attracted to that. And I just thought it's something Sean and I have never done, you know, and the market was shut down. And I thought, well, who knows how long this is going to be shut down? We might have an entire graphic novel done by the time the market kicks back up. So, yeah, it just kind of all fell together like that. And, but yeah, it's like I wanted to create something that sort of felt like it grew out of that era, but I wanted it to feel like it was from our era at the same time. You know, that's why it's like it takes place in the 70s and early 80s, and it flashes all the way back to like the 60s when he was like growing up and going to college. And like I really wanted it to be about that era, but eschew all the like sexism and cliches that are in a lot of those old series, and feel like more like a postmodern take on that. Almost like I had never seen a character like Ethan in one of those books who, with his like specific background, you know, as like an ex-radical, and like, I don't want to reveal the twists that are in the book too much, but like I'd been thinking about a character like that with like really conflicted loyalties. And, you know, I love those kind of damaged leads that you can put into those books. And, I just think it's funny though, like our closest version of like a hero is still a guy who pretty much breaks like every law in the book. It's more like, what if Parker was a good guy and cared about things a little bit? But yeah, it was a lot of fun. And I wrote the first half of the book really fast, actually. I think Sean was drawing the story we did for the Parker book that IDW is publishing next year, our extra story. And he was sending me those pages as I was kind of thinking up all of this stuff. And I'd been going back and looking at those, you know, Parker graphic novels again, because we were working on the hardback stuff. And I just kept thinking again, like, God, I wish we'd done something like this. And I felt like, you know, I didn't know what the reaction to pulp was going to be because it was just delayed at the printer. If I'd known it was going to be like such a raging hit, I would have felt more confident. But I just thought, well, what the hell? Let's just do it. Now's the perfect time because there's no reason not to. And I wrote the first half of it, like pretty much, you know, over the course of a week or two, I think. And then Sean started drawing it, and I just kept seeing all the pages come in, and I kept thinking, like, this is really clicking. Like, we're both moving faster than we were when we were doing monthly comics because we don't have to stop every month and figure out what the cover is and work on the letters page and, you know, all the logistics of going to print every month. Like, we only have to deal with that now once at the end of the book, which is like, that's great. But I was like, as the pages were coming in and I was reading it, I was just thinking, I got to show this to other people. And I had a PDF of like the first half of the book, and I sent it to like Patton and Damon Lindelof and Joe Hill and like 3 or 4 other people. And everyone wrote back that they were, and was just like surprised that we were doing something like that, but also just like blown away by the, you know, like it just felt like this thing that just kind of like poured out of me at this moment. And then Sean was really just like nailing it with all the art, and making it a period piece was so much fun too, because both of us can hunt down, like try to find like old locations. Like there's a taco stand that Ethan goes to in the first half of the book that doesn't exist anymore. That was like one of the classic like Hollywood taco stands that's now like down the street. Yeah, it was just a lot of fun to go back to that era kind of.
It's interesting that it sounds like the writing process was different from what you were doing with Criminal and Pulp as far as recently. And I would assume Friday as well.
Yeah.
Because it does, I mean, again, the tropes are there. But I guess, yeah, like you said, I mean, a different character. And I guess just a slight adjustment from nobody's a good guy to, like you said, this guy cares about what he does.
Yeah, exactly. Like, I think some of the characters in Criminal, like, definitely are, like, good guys, but they commit crimes for a living. Whereas, like, this was a character, like, when I started thinking about who he would be, because at first I was like, well, what would set him apart from, what makes him different than, like, Travis McGee or Jack Reacher or any of these kind of mystery solvers that are really, that usually they solve the mystery by just creating a bunch of trouble and waiting to see who comes to get them. Like, what makes him different than that? And I started thinking about, like, well, what if you'd lived through all of these eras and you were looking back from right now to, like, the mid 70s when, scientists first started predicting a lot of the environmental stuff that's going on now. And, and these reports would be given to the government who would just, like, put them in the trash can. So I started thinking about, like, how I could make him stand apart from all that. And a lot of it was that sense that, here's a guy with a sort of apocalyptic worldview almost, who then, because there's some kind of decent streak in him, he wants to help people, even though, like he says to Rainey in the book, I figure if we're all doomed, why not try to make someone's life better, even just for a day or two? And it's like, I never wrote a character like that, really.
Yeah.
Like most of my characters are like, I'm a crook and I'm in too deep and, like, I'm a decent person, but I'll probably shoot you if you're in my way. Like, Tracy Lawless is as close to a good guy as we get, and he became a hitman.
Exactly. Yeah.
It was a big. It's funny because it doesn't feel like that big a departure, because I also feel like evolutionary wise, like, if you look at the way Sean and I have been telling stories for the last, like, 10 years since we started our Image deal, I can see so many like things that we've developed, like ways I started changing the way we told a story in Fatale, and then, going into the Fade Out, where I started doing these pages where the text would say one thing and then the images would tell two different stories at the same time. And then in Kill or Be Killed, it became this thing where we just always went off on tangents and then got back to, oh yeah, I forgot I was about to shoot that guy. And so, like, now with Reckless, like, I really felt like, like it was, like, it almost felt casual. Like, it's casually sucking you into this thriller. You're just sort of slowly learning about this guy. And then suddenly everything heats up and you're like, oh shit. And, but I still felt like it left you, hopefully I feel like it leaves you feeling the same way most of our books do. Like, it doesn't just sort of, I felt like that ending really makes me feel sad when I read it over, kind of, even though, it's as happy of an ending as we've ever had in one of our books, probably. Like, the last book before this, like, the last two books before this have ended with people dead, covered in blood. This one, like, ends with a guy surfing.
I thought of you actually with him surfing and the motif of him being out there and everything. And Jesus, your near-death experience recently and everything. So it's kind of interesting that he finds calm in the waters. It seems like that's where he is okay, or at least kind of centered.
Yeah. And I mean, I was sort of tapping into that, I mean, it's a little bit different now because I almost got killed in it, but I still do love to just, like, go out, whenever there's not a ton of tourists around. I love to go out and just sort of sit there and listen to the ocean and, thinking about that as, like, it's that constant reminder of, like, there's a line in Pulp towards the end when he's talking about, like, his family down in Mexico and how he was able to find just this sort of small piece in the repetition of days of just raising a family and taking care of the land and just surviving. It's like that feel of, like, what you think life in Hobbiton was probably like, where it's like, it's just kind of peaceful and everybody just got drunk and gardened, told stories, It's like, but it's like, when you think about what the world has done to us, I think about that a lot. Like, our lives were meant to be small and local. Like, our brains are more geared to thinking small and local. It's like one of my neighbors was saying something, because we've been getting like, heat waves in November and December still. And, so some of my older neighbors are starting to finally like accept that maybe global warming is a real thing. And I was like, yeah, but it's like, think of it this way. Like, if you own land and a company buys the land next door to you and immediately steals all your groundwater because they drill deeper, it's really easy to understand how the environment is affected by things on a small local level.
Yeah.
If some company is like, oh, we're going to divert your river in your community and you'll lose all your water for your community, you're like, no, you're not. Everybody then becomes like, no matter what side of the argument you're on, everybody wants their own town to have groundwater. And so when you look at it that way, it's really easy to get people to think about what you're saying. But when you think about like, oh, they're doing it in the ocean, and it's like, the ocean is such a big thing, you can't wrap your hands around it, So it's like our brains are meant to think small, I think. And I think about that all the time of like where is the moments you can just find peace and think like life today is exactly the same as life yesterday. Which goes back thousands of years. Like when I'm standing on the beach listening to the ocean, like someone was standing here hundreds and hundreds of years ago listening to the same ocean, looking at the same sun. And it's like there's something, like there's this sense that we're building towards something all the time now in society. And I think it's part of our destructive urge in a way.
Okay. I said in the 70s as it is. Would you ever create a playlist for a soundtrack?
I should totally do that. Yeah, I should totally soundtrack it.
Yeah. No, because honestly, man, between
we got the 70s to the early 80s, it's like...
Yeah, well, and Jacob's Colors, too.
Yeah.
And Sean's Art, I mean, it is that California reds and oranges and sunrise, sunsets kind of,
Yeah, I had to explain to them that California in like the 70s and 80s, like, was not quite as brown as it is now. Like it was more green and like sunset colors. And I like sent Jake a bunch of pictures from like Terrence Malick movies from the 70s.
Oh, good.
But yeah, I should totally work on that. I hadn't even thought about that. Yeah, the next book actually opens in 1985. And part of his opening narration is talking about all the like awful music of the mid 80s that he never thought we'd have to be listening to for the rest of our lives. Because who thought that? Like usually a song would get like 15 or 20 years. If it became a golden oldie, you'd hear it on AM radio. But like, dude, you're at Whole Foods and you're listening to a song from 1985 by The Cure now.
100%. Absolutely. No, you're right. And Simple Minds and Naked Eyes.
Yeah, all those songs just never went away. Like, I mean, but the reference points for them are totally different. Now it's like some person's in there and like, oh, I remember when I was 5 and that was a McDonald's commercial.
For real. No, God, there's some teen movie that I saw, and it was Spider-Man: Homecoming, and half the soundtrack was 80s. Like, God, it ended with the Ramones song, and I mean, Teenage Love Song, the Flock of Seagulls song after I ran. I'm like, really? Okay, they're dancing to this at prom? Okay,
Yeah, that did so well with the Guardians of the Galaxy, too, which I guess James Gunn had to, like, fight to include in there was, like, the 70s soundtrack. But, yeah, that was, like, the biggest selling soundtrack in years. So... Yeah, no, I should totally do that. I didn't think about that. Yeah, for when My Heroes Have Always Been Junkies came out, one of the places I went to do a signing had taken all the songs that are mentioned in the book and made like a playlist that was playing during the signing, which I only noticed like halfway through. I was like, oh,
that's awesome.
Like I should have thought of
that. And I don't think this is spoiling. Lawless has a love of, I'm forgetting his first name. Ethan
Reckless, yeah.
Reckless, excuse me.
Yeah.
Yeah, Ethan's part of his passion is old movies, just like ours. And I do love those scenes in the theaters where he's watching old movies and stuff, and a couple Easter eggs of movie posters and things like that.
That was a big part of why the appeal of doing like a series character like that too is like having grown up like reading these books and just like going back and reading some old ones again. It's like there's certain things in that genre that are, sort of universal. And it's like, if you can come up with like a cool place that your guy operates out of, or like what does he drive? You know, it's like, you always want to know those things. Or like, does he have a cool assistant? You know, and like, there are things usually that evolve with the series too, like, because nobody knows when they do their first book, are they going to get to do a second one usually? Though John D. McDonald, when he started doing Travis McGee, he started doing it as a favor for an editor friend because they'd lost a popular series. And so he was asked to create a series character, and he didn't ever want to do one. And so he thought, all right, well, I've got kind of a good idea, I think, for a different kind of one. And so he wrote the first book and he showed it to his friend, and his friend was like, this is great. Can we publish it? And he's like, hold on, I want to write a couple more and see if I've really got something to say with this, or if it's just me repeating myself every time. And so he wrote 2 more over the course of like the next couple months. And then they actually published the first 3 books in that series like 2 months apart or something like that. Wow. Which is where I got the bright idea for us to put out 3 in a year, which is now that we're almost done with the second book, I'm like, oh my God. like Sean's drawn basically like 3 full graphic novels this year, like wow. 2 of them that are like 140 pages.
Wow.
We'll be done in like early February, but yeah, it's like, we're pretty close, like to being done with the second one already.
They're great, Ed, honestly. And I know, at the beginning of this experiment of releasing graphic novels versus monthlies, you were concerned about making the leap, but it seems to be working. Both they are coming out frequently enough that we feel like, oh, great, now it's been a few months since Pulp.
Yeah,
time for Reckless. That's fantastic. So yeah. It was great from an audience standpoint, and it seems like it's working out from a publishing standpoint as well.
Yeah, we did like a big mail out to retailers and sent out posters and like some promo coasters and stuff.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, like beer coasters for the book, but yeah, the response, it was kind of like all these times when you write to retailers to sort of tell them about like why you want them to order your book, basically, or why they should give your book room in their store. And this was like the easiest one, because I was like, well, I just had like our best selling book where like some stores were selling like over 100 copies in a day. And I was like, all I really need to do is remind them of 2 months ago. Like, here, remember this? Like, here's another one, but it's twice as big and costs a little bit more. So you'll actually make more per unit on it. And it comes out right before Christmas. So, remember how well you did with the last one and order accordingly, hopefully. And the reaction from retailers has been amazing. Like, the orders are like, between the initial orders and the already like pre-reorders, we've almost sold as many as we sold of Pulp in the whole print run. So yeah, it's like insane. Like, I was doing an interview for one of the like websites yesterday, and someone was asking if this is like a sign that the market should be moving more towards this. And I just thought, I don't think anything that Sean and I do, like, I can compare. There are definitely other teams who I think their fans would follow them to whatever they do, like a Fraction and Zdarsky do another book. Like, everybody who bought Sex Criminals, and probably more people, will follow them to whatever. There's a lot of creators who I think could, make the jump to doing that kind of thing. But for us, it was like this kind of, bizarre evolution of like, we just kept wanting to do something more like that. Sean kept, like trying to convince me to do like a European style graphic novel for years. And then finally he wanted to do like a romance graphic novel. So we did Junkies. And then I was like, holy shit, we sold as many of that as we did of the first issue of Criminal. I was like, that's not normal, or maybe it is. Like, and it was like, after, Bad Weekend did pretty well, but that was a reprint. So some people had felt like they'd already read it, even though the hardback version has like an extra 8 pages of story. But when Pulp, hit like it did, I was just like, okay, like, this is just like, listen to your audience. Like, not only will they like follow us to this stuff, but they seem to prefer it. Yeah, this is the format they like. So it's just like, give it to them. And, we've been doing this for 20 years. So it's like, we've kind of trained our readership over the years to follow us from project to project. We don't do the same book for 10 years. We come back to Criminal all the time, but, we'll do several different things in between. And, it always seems to be whatever our new thing is, it's bigger. Like, it's frustrating as hell sometimes because I go back to Criminal and I think like Cruel Summer, I thought was probably the best thing we've ever done in Criminal. And, because it's not a new thing, like, those just don't sell as well. Like, Criminal will never sell as well as Kill or Be Killed or Reckless, like they do well over time, but because of the way comics are ordered, especially single issue comics are ordered, everyone just is like, okay, well, what did I sell of Criminal last time? And that's how many they order. And it's like, you could come off Kill or Be Killed, where it was like our best selling, like, single issue thing ever. So I just assumed, like, all right, well, we've sort of shown them, and it's like, no, you go back to an old thing and they order it like the old thing. And it's like, and I can't blame them because they have to order 4,000 things every month. So, so it's like every time we do something new, it seems to do better than whatever we did last. And, so I was like, okay, let's just keep building off of that. That's why, like, I don't know if you've seen the cover for the second book in the Reckless series yet, but it's like Friend of the Devil, and it just says above the title, it just says a Reckless book. But I want to really, like, be clear here that, like, each of these books is a completely new, like, whole story.
Absolutely.
And especially when we announced we were doing it as a series where they'd be coming so close. A lot of people assumed it was like a trilogy, or like that the first one was just like part 1 of 3. And it's like, no, there's no cliffhanger. This is just like when you're walking through the airport and you're like, oh, there's another one of those, John Sanford novels out. I was like, it's so weird though, because in comics, so much of what the comic store reading audience, like even the biggest graphic novels that have ever existed in comics, like Mouse and Watchmen, the things that arguably started the whole graphic novel market, those were serialized first in magazines. You know, like Watchmen was single issues. Mouse was, over the course of 10 years in Raw. And so it really, I don't know. It's been a shift. And both of us, both Sean and I, found that we worked faster without having all those breaks. So it really feels like a good group for us to finally land in. So hopefully it'll keep, paying dividends.
I hear you, man. I hope, I hope Sean's cool with the schedule, because again, the work is amazing. Well, honestly, man, I mean, like you said, he's doing more pages than ever. And that's great. And truly, you guys are just, it's beautiful to look at. It's a great story. I think people will recognize established actors and characters in the casting, the way that Sean has chosen to draw them, both from a retro standpoint and also from a modern standpoint. I can think of a couple actors right away that easily could play. Yeah,
I was thinking of like young Redford, sort of like, or like mid 70s Redford when he had the shaggy hair.
3 Days of the Condor Redford.
Yeah, like that. Yeah, absolutely. Man. That would be perfect. I know when someone was asking me who I would think of them for an actor, I was like, I wish you could just cast people from the past.
Who would Rainey be?
I would want to do that.
Who would Rainey be?
Oh, I had. If it came out in the 70s, she'd probably have been Jill Clayburgh or somebody like that.
Oh, nice!
Like a really cool character actor who was sort of funny but also sort of tragic, or you could have cast what's her name? Susan Sarandon would have been good.
Yeah,
I just watched The Hunger recently, which really weird. I remember seeing that movie probably 50 times as a kid. I do not know how I followed that movie. Like watching it again recently, it was like from that era where movies definitely did not hold your hand. And, because a lot of times movies these days, half of the dialogue is explaining to you where they just were or where they're about to go. I don't know how many lines of dialogue if you could go through every episode of like Sons of Anarchy and probably pull out 10 minutes of, I'm going to go over here, I'm going over there, I'm doing this, or I just got back from so-and-so. Like there's so much, and that's like an average TV show, but yeah, in that movie, you're just like, wait, why is he here? What's he doing? Wait, why did he just age 100 years? like it never really explains itself to you. And I went online and I looked it up while we were watching it, and I was like, oh wow, this is actually based on a book. And the book like explains like Wikipedia explained the whole thing, and I'm like, oh wow, I kind of knew all that from having watched it a bunch of times as a kid. I got like all the different aspects of it. But you really had to, use a lot of work to piece it together yourself. It was kind of funny, but yeah, it was a really weird movie. But yeah, she would have been great as like a Rainey, like that type. It's hard. I'm trying not to think about. I hope that that something happens with this for like the modern stuff. I've had some interest already, so I'm.
That's great.
Not too hard on like any of that casting stuff, because then you get attached to somebody. Like, all
right, well, yeah. Do you not want me to reveal who I saw in the lead? I mean, I could.
Yeah. Yeah.
You want me to hear? You want to hear?
Who are you?
I could see Damon or Brad Pitt. I mean, they've aged into that kind of late 30s, even though they're older. Yeah. But from a look standpoint, they got that late 30s Redford look.
Yeah, that's the thing. You need an actor who's like in their mid 30s, kind of mid to late 30s at the most, who can sort of play younger. For Reckless, because he's like 31 or 32 in the first book, and then the next book is like 5 years later or 4 years.
Oh wow!
Later. So yeah, the next book starts in 1985.
There you go, man.
So yeah, you have to find an actor who also is fine aging aging a couple of years every year if you can get a franchise out of it. But
people will not be disappointed in this book, Ed. Honestly, I really appreciate you sending it to me and having the chance to have read it before we talked, because otherwise I would have made you come back like in January or February to review it and everything. How's the Friday experiment going?
Really good. Just got a batch of pages from Marcos actually like half an hour ago. So he's like pretty deep into chapter 3 finally. It's just the Friday thing has been a lot of fun for me because Marcos like doesn't want to have deadlines at all. He just wants to like, he's so painstaking with every page that he just was like, we're publishing it this way through the platform, but we're going to start sometime next year. Probably we'll put out like the first volume of it through Image as like a trade paperback.
Okay.
We're probably going to collect like every 3 chapters because that's kind of like chapter 3 is sort of the end of Act 1, where you get like the first big twist and reveal of the book. And it's also probably by the end of chapter 3, we're like 120 pages in, because like I can't seem to land. Initially I thought the chapters would be 15 or 20 pages long, and they all come out to be like 30 or 40.
Yeah.
But I'm just having so much fun like watching Marcos draw this city. Like chapter 3, really like half of the chapter is her wandering through the city at night during a snowstorm, where she's basically one of the only people out there. And so you get like this real sort of travel log through the town. And, but yeah, it's been a lot of fun. And, I wish we could put it out every month, but I'm also glad that Marcos is taking his time, because then it allows me to like really agonize over every chapter. And with the schedule Sean and I are on, if Marcos wanted a script every month, it would be a nightmare.
It reminds me, pacing wise, of what Fraction and Elsa Chartier did with November.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, which I really love, by the way.
Yeah. That's why, man. You guys are, I honestly, in the 15 years that I've known you guys, it's really fun watching how your writing has evolved and the things that you want to write now. And I'm really glad that the audience has followed you from the big two, to support you on these passion projects.
Yeah, it's weird. You sit down and start writing for a career, and you look up and you're like, yeah, I have known you 15 years. It's like, I realized
you've been doing it longer than that. It's just, I've been
doing it my whole life, really, like self-publishing, like back in the 80s and stuff. But like my professional career, I feel like really I most of the 90s I was publishing, but working like part-time jobs. But really, I got my first real like break in the like late 90s when I did Scene of the Crime. And that was like, from that point on, I was just working nonstop. And, I looked up and I was just like, oh, wow, I've been doing this for 20 years already. And it's like, I never thought I'd be able to have the career I had. Like, I remember early on, after Scene of the Crime was nominated for awards, thinking, oh, maybe I can just do crime stories. And then quickly finding out that there wasn't much of a market for them for, like Scene of the Crime was like a lucky break that we got approved at that point. And then like when Sean and I launched Criminal, it was kind of like, we were both at the height of our careers. Like I had just done Death of Cap. He had just done Marvel Zombies. So it was like, all right, we're going to push this thing. We pushed it really hard. And it was an uphill battle for years to get like people to order it. And to, it was like every time we'd relaunch it, it would do a little bit better. But it was like, I never imagined we'd be here like 15 years later, actually still doing all this stuff and being able to shift over to doing graphic novels. Now I'm like becoming even more ambitious where I'm like, okay, so we'll do these 3 Reckless books and then maybe we'll take a break and do a different graphic novel and then we'll come back and do another Reckless book. But like, I just, it's kind of opened it up for me because I think I've told you before, like the thing that drove me crazy about like stuff like The Fade Out, where we released it as 3 trade paperbacks. It was like Act 1, Act 2, Act 3.
Yeah.
But Act 1 sold probably like 20,000 more copies than either of the other 2 books. I was like, damn it. There's a bunch of people out there who've read the first part and didn't ever read the rest. Like maybe they'll if they bought the whole thing, they wouldn't have read it through anyway, but at least they'd have the option. Wow. And it always drove me crazy. So it's like, I was always thinking of the final format, I mean, you've read the book, so you can see that the flow of the story is a little bit different than our normal stuff. Because it was all going to be one straight book through. Like I was thinking about like, what would I have had to do different if that was 5 comic books or 6 comic books instead? And would have had to have like 6 climaxes, which I think the book has a lot of twists and turns throughout, but there's no set, like at page 25, there's this, at page 50, there's this. And that really freed me up a lot, like being able to do these short, like tangent chapters and just, it made it a lot like more fun, I think, to just sort of go through it. But I also realized it may not seem dramatically different to most of our readership because, ever since we started Criminal, at least, I was always thinking in terms of, how is this going to be collected and what is so I've always thought of them as like books that we're doing or novellas or graphic novels or whatever. But I definitely remember being about halfway through Pulp and thinking, I wish I had like 20 more pages than we had solicited or that Sean could get done in time for printing, because that was like the thing. It was like, we decided ahead of time, this is how much it would be. And I was like, I could have easily spent 10 more pages with those 2 old men, like just getting to know each other. Like that would have been a lot of fun. And I just remember thinking, well, the next time we do one of these, it's going to have to be like 100 pages or something like that. And, I had no idea that would just be the next thing that we did. And it would be like actually more like 140 pages. But I remember just like with both that and Junkies, like the last half of the book, like writing it with a sort of terror of, oh my God, am I going to run out of pages? Am I going to get to the point where I need more room and we have to push the deadline or something, which, we haven't missed a deadline in something like 8 or 10 years. So
outstanding, man.
Yeah, it's insane when I think the fact that we've done this. Like, I don't think we have the world record because, Mark Evanier and Sergio Aragonés probably hold the record of the most comics by 2 people. But I feel like, by the time our careers are done, we'll be very close to the record of like the most books by the same team.
Is there, I mean, you've done war stories within Cap. I'm trying to think of a genre that you?
I know. I thought about doing like a World War II kind of crime story, like with Sean. I don't know how much he'd like to draw all that, uniforms and helmets and machinery and all that stuff, but I'm sure he would do a good job. We've had like Vietnam stuff in our books, and he always nails that stuff. And certainly there's a lot of easy ways to get photo reference. I have an inkling of an idea that for a crime story that I've thought about writing as a movie that would all take place around a USO show.
Oh, wow.
Like a crime story at a USO show in like post D-Day France, after we've liberated France, because I just thought there's got to have been some soldiers over there who were just stealing stuff, like a Three Kings type of story, but with, in that World War II setting where you've got like a stand-up comic. Like I just love
the band leader, the stand-up comic, the pinup.
Yeah, exactly. I love reading about like Bob Hope going over to the USO shows.
Absolutely.
And getting killed and stuff.
Yeah. No, there's some really... I read that Hope biography from a couple of years ago. Chicken and I talked about it, and he read it too. And you're right. There are some interesting World War II stories.
He had to crawl through that sewer to get away from the Nazis in Africa one time when Rommel came to. I think they were going to try and capture him too, because Hitler was a fan. Hitler wanted to meet Bob Hope and Bing Crosby and Clark Gable. He apparently had like if Gable is captured, bring him to me. Wow. Which was like, that would be an interesting movie. Clark Gable's weekend with Hitler trying to figure out how to escape.
My dad was just too young enough to be in World War II, but he was in the occupation. And I remember, and this is why I loved my father, I have many reasons, but The Third Man was on, and he was stationed in Vienna during the occupation and was one of those guys going after black marketers.
Oh, wow.
So there's your crime story right there. And truly,
exactly.
It was on like a typical 5-channel world. It was on like at 1 a.m. And he's like, will you stay up with me and watch this? And I'm like, sure, Dad. And I didn't know and then we sit down. He goes, you want to know what I did when I was in the Army? I said, yeah. He's like, you're about to find out. And I'm like blown away.
That's so cool.
And so, I think of Bernard Lee, as the sergeant. I'm like, that basically was my father, running around and chasing black marketers,
That's so cool. Yeah, I love that sort of post-world era. I think about that, with all the Yakuza movies about how the Yakuza sort of rebuilt up Japan. Yeah. I mean, I hinted at that in Cruel Summer, that opening chapter where they talk about how the Japanese wrestling sort of invented wrestling post World War II, like what we think of as, WWF and all that stuff really started with them paying American wrestlers to come over and wrestle ex-sumo guys because they wanted to beat up Americans because we had dropped 2 atomic bombs on them. Wow. But that like revitalized their economy and led to the popularization of everybody getting their own TV. They used to have to go to the town squares and there'd be TVs put up all around, so they would stand around and watch the wrestling. But I love all that era. I got to meet Soderbergh years ago at one of Jeff Garland's like interview things. He did a live interview with Soderbergh that was not on his podcast. Soderbergh just wanted it to be a live thing, only not broadcast. And I got to meet him and talk to him for a couple minutes afterwards. And I told him how much I liked The Good German, and he was like, "Oh, you were the one who clapped when that came up." I was like, "That was me." I love that. I loved how you made it like look like a movie from that era, but feel like a movie from today.
Yep.
Like a movie in that era would never have addressed all those topics so brutally about like black marketing and, the prostitution and all the, the way the women were treated during the occupation after the war and stuff. It's just like brutal, but so good. But I think that was one of those movies where like he was such a big movie maker, they couldn't stop him from making it. Now you have to be David Fincher to make a black and white movie.
Do you know the Joe Gould story? They made that movie, I want to say with Paul Rudd, and I still haven't seen it. The Catcher Was a Spy. And this is
I haven't seen that either. Yeah, I don't know about that.
But I know the real story about Joe Gould. He was for people listening that don't know, he was a backup catcher for the Boston Red Sox who ultimately wound up in the OSS.
Oh, wow.
And in the 30s, there was an all-star team of baseball players that went to Japan to play exhibition games, including Babe Ruth. And this backup, literally third-rate catcher was part of the team. And everyone's like, why is he there? And he had a movie camera with him, and he would stroll to the top of buildings and just shoot the skyline from a bird's eye view. And essentially, that's the footage they used for Jimmy Doolittle's 30 Seconds Over Tokyo raid.
Oh, wow.
Retaliation for Pearl Harbor.
That's
so, yeah,
cool. That's really, that's a great story. Yeah, I love all that stuff. Yeah, there's a lot of, like that. There's a great book. I can't remember what the name of the book is now, but it's about this guy who was like a double agent in like the late 30s and early 40s who helped uncover a bunch of Nazi spy rings for the FBI because he was recruited and he immediately went to the FBI. I was like, hey, this guy's trying to get me to join this Nazi spy ring. And they're like, do it. But they were planning to like blow up munitions factories and the docks. And they had all this stuff that they were planning to do to make it hard for America to join the war, basically. And, it was a lot of people from Germany, but it was actually also a lot of Americans who were, Nazis. So,
the American Bund, all those.
Yeah, idiots. The American Bund were totally, and that, that event in pulp, in the paperback version, which just went to print, we actually have like I added an extra section at the back with some reference and materials to sort of prove that, because I got some people questioning the historical accuracy of the book. And I was like, first off, I do my research. I may occasionally get a date wrong here or there, but like someone questioned the flyer that the main character Max like is reading from about the reference to concentration camps. And I'm like, no, that's the actual flyer, like word for word. So I like printed that flyer at the back and some photos from the rally and
crazy,
because I was like, I want people to know like this, this really did happen here. This was, and it was only because of that rally and the reaction to it that people started turning against the Nazi movement in America, actually, because they were like horrified to see how big it had grown. Meanwhile, like a lot of like white German people had been sending their kids to these like Hitler youth camps in like the Catskills throughout the 30s. And it's like, what the fuck?
The guy who coached the track team for the 36 Olympics was essentially an American Bund guy. Yeah. And that's one of the reasons why he was shitty to Marty Glickman. Marty Glickman, the great sportscaster from New York, who was on the track team, Jewish gentleman, obviously, and got screwed out of running in the 4-man relay race because the American Bund coach thought it would be insulting to Hitler. Unbelievable. Yeah, I got to meet that guy.
Yeah, and we just, it's like I feel like I guess this theme of my life lately is like if you don't learn from history, you're just going to repeat it endlessly. But I feel like we're at an era where it's like impossible to get anybody to learn anything that they decided ahead of time they didn't want to learn. Like, if I could pick one superpower, it would be the ability to like, get people off of something that they've attached themselves to. And I feel it in myself sometimes, like something I like want to believe, and then I find out the facts of it are not exactly what I thought they were. And that because everything's got more nuance than the real world or the internet world has boiled down to,
Well, that's the problem, Ed, and you know it better than I do, that algorithms are even without our control leading us to a certain frame of thinking. And that's terrible. God, my uncle who made it to his late 80s used to like love pointing at the 25-cent newspaper. He's like, this is the greatest thing in the world. He goes, I find out things every day that I never, and he would read it cover to cover, that I never would have thought of reading about. And now look at, certainly the paper edition is shit. And if you're reading your news online, the algorithms are only leading you to stories that they know you want to read about. It's terrible.
Yeah. Yeah. It's weird. I think we talked about this before, but it's like sometimes I'll be on YouTube and I'll be like looking at like interviews with comedians or whatever. And if you're like looking at an interview with a comedian where they're on the Joe Rogan show, Like the next 5 things that are offered to you after that are like the most hardcore right wing, like conspiracy theory shit. And I'm like, how does Anthony Jeselnik talking about shit jokes lead me to, the Holocaust didn't really happen? It's like, what the fuck, YouTube? You don't have to do that. I'm not going to stay longer. Trust me.
I hear you, man.
But that where it's, we're in Philip K. Dick's future. We just don't have the flying cars and the rain, apparently. But we really, it's like, I watched that documentary on YouTube about the social dilemma.
Yes, the Netflix doc. Yes,
I've been seeing all that for the last 20 years, like everybody being sort of pushed off into these little, side areas where they only want to hear their own little echo chamber. And, people, I think the first moment that someone on the news quoted someone from Twitter, and you go look it up and you're like, oh, that person on Twitter with 8 followers, like that's a person that we're going to quote on like the national media now. Like what's happening to the, and it's like, I don't want to be like the person arguing for gatekeepers to come back. But on another level, like the local newspaper actually had journalistic standards that they by law had to uphold or they would get sued. like when someone in the paper got something wrong, they usually had to retract it, and nowadays it's just like, who the fuck knows? Like, and once Obama got elected, like anything that arrived at our house from our in-laws was like some Facebook conspiracy about how he wasn't born in America and how he hated America. Like, I think about this a lot. Like, I'm really glad, it's a terrible thing to say, but I'm really glad my dad didn't live to see this era. Because my dad was not like a hardcore right-wing guy, but he was a lifelong military guy. And so he was a Republican. But I watched him through the Bush and Obama years kind of change. Like he'd been a McCain supporter against Bush, but then he supported Bush over Gore. And then when Bush got in, he just sort of bought all the bullshit.
Really?
Like think about what's going on right now. Like how many people think the election was rigged somehow, which even though every expert in the world is saying it was the most secure one we've ever had. But like, let's not forget, like I'm old enough to remember that the on the eve of our invasion of Iraq, which was bullshit and, made up lies about weapons of mass destruction, 78% of America believed Saddam Hussein was part of 9/11. And I remember seeing those polls and thinking, when you're polling those people and they tell you that, is there a moment where you go, well, just so you know, that's actually factually incorrect? But apparently, if you try to tell someone a thing that they believe is incorrect, they drill down harder on the thing. And it's like, so I see that in myself sometimes where I'm like, oh, like and it's like a constant fight to, like this is why I think about all this stuff and why I love to like go out to the ocean and think about the fact that essentially human beings are just like any other animal. Our lives every day were basically meant to not be that different than the day before, which makes life seem almost insignificant in some ways, but it's also really beautiful if you can just listen to the ocean or listen to the rain or think about the fact that whatever you're doing, people have been doing it for hundreds of years. If you're bagging groceries, people have been bagging groceries for hundreds of years. Like there's a certain simpleness in our lives that we've lost because we constantly connect to this wider world where just shit is, it's like we don't have room for that many inputs in our brain, I think. And that's one of the things I love about like books and comics and movies. Like I'm a single tasker. When I'm reading a book, I'm not also checking my email. I'm with you. When I'm watching a movie, I'm not looking at an iPad. I don't even have an iPad, but I'm not like checking my phone while I'm watching a movie. I'm not, I don't do those things. I don't even have my phone near me usually. Like I keep my phone in my office, and when I leave my office, whatever time of day I've decided I'm done writing, like I don't look at my phone very often. I'll go back in there around 8 and see if anybody texted me or called or if there was something important. And every now and then it's like, oh shit, I should have my phone around me that day. But people know now that I'm not like a person who constantly has their phone on them.
I
And
hear you,
so, people kind of come to expect that if they text you, they might not hear back for a day.
I understand.
But I've really tried to embrace that, and more through the pandemic. Like I was thinking about, like you mentioned, like Sean and I are doing more pages now, and I was like, why? I was thinking in the back of my mind, why is that so different? And I thought, oh, Sean hasn't been allowed to take a vacation this year. Like Sean took a vacation right after he finished Pulp for like a week. Him and his wife went to, I think, the Canary Islands or something, and met up with Ian Rankin and some other people were all there. And he sent me pictures of them all at like the hotel bar. And I remember thinking, don't get that virus that people are talking about. And then when he got back, it turned out that like someone from one of the hotels down the way had actually gotten coronavirus. But it was February, when people were still like, we didn't know what it was going to be.
Sure.
Though I was like paranoid the whole time. But I just remember that it was like Sean's more European. They like to go on vacations and stuff. But we've all been in lockdown, so it's been very productive.
No, I understand.
Like Sean is literally, there was a moment recently where I realized he'd sent me 32 pages in the last month as opposed to the usual like 24 or 28. And I was like, oh God, this is why I'm always like barely staying ahead of him. I was like, he's actually upped his productivity like 20% during the pandemic. So yeah, it's been a lot of fun.
Who's Ian Rankin's character again? Scottish writer, mysteries.
Oh, Rebus.
Rebus, of course.
Yeah. Ian Rankin is like, I think probably one of the top 5 like crime writers in the world. He's not as big in America. He's had a couple different series, but Rebus is the one they made like 5 seasons of TV shows out of.
Oh yeah,
they're all really great.
Absolutely. No, I'll confess I've mostly watched the TV shows rather than read his books.
He's really good too. Yeah, I love his books. He came to LA on his book tour a couple years ago when I was supposed to meet up with him, but I had broken my foot and I was just in a shoe and taking pills and didn't feel like I was up to driving across LA to meet up with him. I felt terrible, but he totally understood. I think he'd been in LA for a few days, so he understood. It's basically like crossing the sea to get to the other side of town.
Yeah. I know. That's my only knock when I visited LA is just how spread out it is. How impossible it is to go from, sub-city to sub-city, Century City to, whatever.
A couple times a year,
et cetera.
Yeah, a couple times a year normally. I have really bad like temporal mandibular joint disorders because of typing too much and clenching my jaw. And so I'll get like my head just feels weird, like one ear is always clogged. And a couple times a year I have to go see this dental surgeon down in LA who gives me Botox shots in some of my muscles to sort of let them relax a little bit more, which is one of the only things that has given me any relief from it ever. But she's literally in Brentwood. And it's just like, there's no good time of day from where I live in LA when I'm in LA to go there and get back. And it's like, I remember asking her on my first visit, I was like, what time should I be trying to get across the 405? And she's like, you might want to wait till like 10 o'clock at night. I was like, wow, this is just unfair. It took me 2 hours to drive home and it was like a 15-mile drive.
Wow.
But it was like, it did help.
Wow.
But yeah, it's one of those things where one of your friends moves to the west side. You're like, oh, well, I'll never see you again. It's like when you live in San Francisco and your friend moves to Oakland. It's like, I know I can take the train, but I'm never going to.
I turned down a San Francisco job because they're like, you can live in Oakland. I'm like, you live in Oakland.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Those people who like live way out in the suburbs and have to take the train to work to their Wall Street job every day. It's like, man, that's like a rough commute.
I don't know how they do it, Ed. Honestly, I've always been 20 minutes away from downtown, even when I lived in some of the northern Chicago suburbs. I've been very lucky that way. And I don't know.
Yeah, that's
if you don't mind, just a couple more minutes, and I wanted to ask you what you've been watching and what you're reading these days.
Oh God, what have I?
If you have time,
into there's got to be something I loved recently. I actually rented Tenet today, finally, because I did not go see it in a movie theater. Like a smart person, I didn't go kill myself to watch a Chris Nolan movie, even though I love his movies. I was really digging the new Fargo, but I'm not sure it stuck the landing, honestly. Like, I got to go back and rewatch the whole thing, because there was one episode towards the end of the season that was like all in black and white. That was probably one of my favorite episodes of Fargo ever. And, but I felt like I got a little bit lost in the season because there were so many characters in the story. Like, the first episode, I think, introduces like 25 characters or something. But I loved the way they were telling that story and how they were using the crime story to talk about all these, larger issues that are all still incredibly relevant today. I was digging that. The director, Tim Miller, I had a meeting with years ago, like after he did the Deadpool movies. And I'd never read any of those Joe Abercrombie fantasy books before. And he was really pushing those. I think he was trying to get a TV show made with Abercrombie at Netflix at the time. And so when I was doing my drive from LA to like Northern California, where we go back and forth, I started listening to all the books on tape of those and got completely hooked on them. And his new series is coming out now, and it's like the Industrial Revolution version of like a fantasy thing. It's just really interesting, like pure escapism. But it's kind of funny because I think this guy's stuff was, when he first started putting books out like 20 years ago, was like kind of revolutionary in the same way that George R.R. Martin was, where the stuff was kind of brutal and like the politics of it wasn't good versus evil, really. It was like, wait, are the good guys actually the bad guys here too? Like, is it just about like the politics of all these nations and evolution? And so I was really excited that he decided to sort of do another trilogy where he jumped all the characters forward like 40 years. And it's now like the beginning of the Industrial Revolution in like a fantasy world. I've never seen anything like that before. I'm really enjoying those.
Did you see the Herman Mankiewicz movie yet on Netflix?
Oh yeah, of course.
How is it?
I really liked it. I think you have to know enough about Wells and enough about Citizen Kane and Hearst to really get everything out of it.
Okay.
But what I was really blown away by was it feels like a movie from 1940, as well as like a biopic kind of. Like, it really has the structure of a movie that came out in 1940. It doesn't have the same structure as Citizen Kane, but it has a structure of like a lot of those Mankiewicz-y kind of movies, actually. Like, there's a lot of flashbacks to this. Upton Sinclair was running for the governor of California as like a out and out like socialist.
Yes.
And he was doing well in the polls. And then the studios started making all these commercials where they would bring in actors to pretend to be like farmers and stuff, to act like really terrified of Upton Sinclair and his socialist policies and all this stuff. Absolutely. And, he ended up losing in like a landslide to a guy who'd barely gotten like 10% of the vote in the previous election or something. And that is a lot of what the movie's about, is this sort of, it reminds me a lot of What Makes Sammy Run, in a way. Like,
interesting.
Which is, a great book that they have tried to make a movie out of a few times. But what's interesting about that book is it's about a guy talking about a more successful writer. It's like about a writer who moves to LA to become a screenwriter, who's like an ex-newsman. And he runs into this guy that used to be like the newsboy at his job, who's like one of those guys who's just going straight up the ladder as quick as humanly possible, in like the worst way humanly possible, where he's like hiring other writers on the sly to do all his work and just like signing his name to it and giving them like 10% of whatever he gets. And he's basically become like a mover and shaker. And there's this sense of like, it's just this empty thing that he's chasing. And like, it's one of those books where you read it and you get to the end and you're just like, holy shit. Like, that says everything about like all the quest for success in almost any field is this moment where you're standing there alone and you've put in all this effort and you've fucked over all these people, like especially in that book. And here you are on the day of your honeymoon, like watching a guy drive away who doesn't like you. And you're like, just stay for one more drink.
I was friends with
that place.
I was friends with Bud Schulberg. I knew Bud Schulberg.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Because of boxing. Boxing was our connection. And last 5 years of his life, I got to know him really well.
Oh, wow.
Great guy. And I know, people who know a little bit about him. He was up for the Un-American Activities Committee.
Yeah.
He named names.
Yeah.
I know several of our mutual writer friends are like, well, and I'm like, look, the guy was being threatened with his career, and also was genuinely afraid.
I think he was
the communist influence.
Yeah, I think he was actually kind of like a lot of those guys, especially when it all kind of was going on and people were going to prison and stuff. I think a lot of those people did really turn against that whole movement and think, like, what, I'm supposed to like lose my entire life because so and so went to a meeting once. Like it's a really conflicted
nuance
part of our life. It's I look back at it and it's like, yeah, it's easy to say that, but also, there were a lot of people who named names who named people that they knew had already been named, because they didn't want to lose their career, but they also didn't want to fuck over any of their friends.
Absolutely.
Like it's just I hate to, I think we think about it so much because it always comes up again, like McCarthyism, the idea of, your name is so tarnished that you can't work. Like,
cancel culture, what we're dealing with right now.
Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely an issue that we'll continue to grapple with. I remember, when I was being interviewed about the fade out, people like, Trump was running for president, and I was just thinking, like, I wonder if we'll get another blacklist. And it's like, I think it turns out blacklists are things that people circularly do to themselves now. Sometimes.
Totally. You're not wrong, man.
I'm trying to think of what else I've read recently. Oh, I read Basket Full of Heads, the Joe Hill, Leo Max book. Cool. I got the hardback of that. I really dug the. I was very resistant to it, and I probably wouldn't have bought it, but everybody raved about the Slaughterhouse-Five graphic novel adaptation, and it was really good. Actually, it gave itself a reason for existing as a comic. Actually, like it used the language of comics. It did a very Vonnegut thing by acknowledging that it was an adaptation of a book, as opposed to, like he acknowledges the reader so often in his stuff. Like I really felt like it played around with his language and made itself something worth, doing. We've been watching a lot of like Christmas related things, and I hadn't watched Elf for about 10 years, and we watched that yesterday, and I was like, this is just like the perfect idea for a movie ever.
I just had literally an hour before talking to you, I was talking to this producer, Brian Volk Weiss, who made those TV shows, The Toys That Made Us, The Movies That Made Us.
Oh, yeah.
And now The Holiday Movies That Made Us is on Netflix.
Oh, wow.
And they've got an episode about Elf.
Oh, God, I got to go check that out.
And it's only like a half hour. It's excellent. It's outstanding. I've been watching one thing I watched, they call it Money Heist on Netflix. I finally got a chance to watch all of that during the last month or so. It's all in Spanish, but it's pretty out there. Like it goes in much bigger places than I expected it. They're almost like revolutionaries who are robbing like the mint of their country, actually, or like the mint where they print euros. Which I was like, wow, this is a really big heist. It's broken down over like 10 episodes, actually. And it's pretty well done, actually. I know it's like one of the most popular shows in the world, but I'd never actually watched it, and I was really blown away by it. I loved Mank, though. I thought Mank was an excellent, I want to say it.
It's a weird one. Like Fraction and I were talking about it, and, like we both know a lot of Wells' history. He knows more than I do. But it's like it gets stuff wrong. Like it doesn't fully hardcore, go the Pauline Kael argument where Wells didn't do anything, but it does kind of end on that. It ends with Mankiewicz, at least. It acknowledges that Mankiewicz argued that Wells did nothing, which was kind of like the bitter feud that they fell into after the movie. But like, you can find all the memos. You can find the memo where like Wells is insisting on Mankiewicz's name being listed first. You can find, you can go online and read articles where people compare all the different drafts of the movie, including the first draft of it where it was called something else, which was written by Wells, that like Mankiewicz took and basically threw out most of and turned into Citizen Kane. But like, there's a lot of work that Wells actually did do on that, and it's like, I hesitate to ever take the director's side against a writer as a member of the guild and as a writer who has had directors take credit for work I did. But
Gabe
I also
Hardman,
feel like,
I was gonna say Gabe Hardman and Andy Parks and I constantly talk about Wells, and we've read a ton of things.
Oh yeah,
and it's funny because Gabe is kind of the anti-Wells, and Andy and I are kind of the pro-Wells people. but then again, he's kind of full of shit sometimes too when he talked to.
Oh yeah, Wells is like a con artist too. Like, I mean, he conned RKO into letting him make that movie.
Yeah,
he like shot so much of the movie before they even knew what it was about. Because
I love those stories. Absolutely.
Tests and
yes,
stuff.
Yes.
Like, he was the ultimate outsider coming in and trying to control everything. But yeah, I loved that, like, that Fincher was in a place where he could make a black and white movie. And I saw some quote from him where he said, because he just signed like a 4-year overall at Netflix. And he said something about like, well, depending on how many people watch Mank, I'll either be going, so what would you like me to do? Or I'll be insisting that they let me make another black and white movie because I'm a big shot. Like, I was just like, that is like the greatest reaction.
Well, that's why it's a really interesting time right now. I'm so happy for Greg with Old Guard.
Yeah.
That Old Guard did as well as it did. And it's a good movie. It's a fun movie.
Yeah, and it's actually pretty close to the comics, like adaptation-wise. Like, it does tell there's bits of the second book, but it basically tells the story of the first book. Like, it tells it in with a couple different twists and turns here or there, and a little bit more action probably. But yeah, and then the big twist at the end that was totally not in the comics, which I have no idea how they're going to keep that series going now. But maybe Charlize was like, what if I'm not immortal and then I don't have to do all these? But yeah, no, that was so good. Yeah, Greg's had just a great run. I was so bummed to see Stumptown got canceled because Stumptown was like the modern Rockford Files. It was so much fun to watch.
Kobe Smulders really nailed the role.
She was perfect. Yeah. And I mean, I hope someone else will pick that up, like a Hulu or somebody.
Yeah, or a Netflix, like they did with Longmire from back in the day.
Exactly. Because, that was it exactly. It was like Longmire, but for the younger version, for the younger audience.
Yes.
And I, from what I understood, it was like the live viewing numbers were not as big as
DVR people
streaming and DVR and Hulu numbers and all that were where they were really seeing a lot of watches. So, but that just seems like a no-brainer show. Like when you look at what's out there. So
and a different locale, which I think helped.
Yeah, exactly.
And a different perspective.
What else? I loved the Queen's Gambit. I've had a couple arguments with people who didn't like the end. But I thought the whole way through, maybe it could have been one episode shorter if you really want to be hypercritical about it. Do we need a whole episode of her drinking? I think yes, because I like watching it. But I've noticed her in things before, but that was the first time where I was like, oh, this girl is a huge star. And Scott Frank wrote and directed every episode. That was something, like, I couldn't stop watching it once I started. I think I watched the whole thing in 2 days.
That's awesome. I'm liking.
And then I forgot about that it was a Tevis book, and I was like, for the first couple episodes, I'm like, is this a true story? And then I looked it up. I'm like, oh no, okay, it's a fictional story, sort of imagining what if a Bobby Fischer type character came along back in that era of like the 60s and the early 70s, like so it can address like the changing times and the women's movement and stuff. And and of course it's Tevis, so it's also all about his like drug and alcohol problems. Like he was always sneaking all that stuff into his books. But yeah, it's like the same guy who wrote The Hustler, you know, who then writes you know, The Queen's Gambit, which I guess people have been trying to get made as a movie since the mid 80s or so.
Wow.
And could never get it made. Like I think Jodie Foster was attached to it at one point like, in the 80s. But yeah, I thought that was really great. There was a really fun, we're big fans of the Great British Bake Off in my house because it's a show that makes my wife want to bake. And it's also just, there's something, we watched like the American version of it. And I noticed the Americans they're probably all just as competitive, but the Brits hide their competitiveness behind like this politeness too. Like they're too polite to be outwardly like, I nailed that, or yes, I'm going to win. So there's like something really charming about it. We even watched like the Junior Bake Off one where it's children. And my wife initially was like, wait, are they going to be easier on the kids? Because it's going to be tragic if they're just as brutal with the kids. And they are just as brutal with it. There's so much children crying on this show, but their cute little accents are so great. But so we were watching that. And then I've really missed the original co-hosts that they had on the show, Mel Gedroych and Sue Perkins. And there's like a show on Peacock where they play hit women.
Oh, wow. Like, I have seen that show.
Yeah, it was really fun. And Nash Edgerton has a show that I think there's 2 seasons of on Hulu called Mr. In Between. That's like a fixer who works for criminals in Australia.
Funny.
And yeah, it's really fun. It's like a black comedy, basically. But like when you realize it's a black comedy, is like the opening scene, he's like talking to someone who basically he's been sent to beat up to get, you know, because the guy was late with a payment or something. And the guy's basically just trying to talk him out of it. And he's like, they're having this totally normal, rational conversation. And then he just shoves the guy off the landing that they're on. And he falls like 3 stories to the ground and breaks both his legs.
Wow.
And you're just like, oh, I see what this show is. And that was a lot of fun.
That's awesome. But
cool. Yeah, I've been mainly just kind of putting on a lot of movies lately, more because TV has sort of run out at this point. A lot of TV, you know, because of the pandemic and pandemic shooting. Everybody has found takes a lot longer. It's like 25% longer to make like a TV pilot right now.
Yeah,
because of all the restrictions and everything. And my friend Anders Holm is making he's on like the new Shonda Rhimes show on Netflix or one of the miniseries. And he sent me a picture of himself inside his glass cubicle. And like the way that they're doing sets right now is like when you're an actor and you're on call that day, when you're not on set shooting, you are literally, you put a mask on and you go to this holding area where they literally put you in an enclosed glass cube and you're sitting in like a director's chair and you can just like read or text people or whatever. So you can't interact with the other actors or whatever, but they're all sitting in these glass cubes in the same room, like looking at each other. I was like, wow. But like they can't, all the different crew people have to have different quadrants. So if someone in one, you know, if the carpenters have like a guy who tests positive, then they have to like test all the carpenters and isolate anybody who tests positive. And, you know, so it's been interesting. Everybody I know who's had a production has had at least one person get COVID. And some have had a couple where like non-symptomatic, like everybody gets tested every day and someone will be like non-symptomatic, but potentially have exposed like 5 or 10 people. So it's like, shit. Like so it's costing way more and it's taking longer. And, you know, I'm glad that when all the vaccines are coming out and you can see some light at the end of the tunnel, but I'm guessing things aren't going to be back to any semblance of normal until like summer or fall of as far as like business goes.
I agree.
Like I don't think I can't imagine myself wanting to go eat inside a restaurant until at least the summer. Like we've only gotten takeout a couple times even because it's just, like even though everyone's social distancing and wearing masks where we live, like still when you're waiting in line at the Chinese place, people start getting closer and closer. And, whenever I'm outside and I've been around people like waiting at the bank teller or something, there's always one person who's just coughing into their mask. And you're like, you just get that paranoid panic of like, oh God, I really don't want to get this. Please get me out of here immediately. So I feel really lucky to, have already had a job where I worked at home. But like my mom had to have surgery a couple of weeks ago, and in the rehab after the surgery, the rehab clinics are basically like the same as like the old folks home kind of retirement home places where or managed care, and she got sick while there, and before they were sending her home, they tested her for COVID the day they sent her home, and then like 3 days after she'd been home for 3 days sick, they called to let her know she had COVID, and it looks like she's going to be fine. She's had kind of a rough time of it, but by the time they give you your test results, you've been around people, and then everybody then has to. So, yeah, it was. I was totally, when I knew that they had delayed her surgery as long as they could, basically, and then they thought, okay, it's safe now, and it was before Christmas or it was before Thanksgiving. But then she was in the place for a couple weeks, so she must have been there after the Thanksgiving rush. So yeah, it's just been a hell of a year, man.
Yeah,
I can't wait for it to be over.
I hear
and
you,
at the same time, I've been looking forward to this book coming out 2 weeks before the year ends.
Yeah, but again, you're providing distractions and entertainment with your productive year, and really, Ed, I'm glad you found a way to work through it and innovate in the meantime, and find these different avenues that can satisfy what you want to write and what your collaborators want to draw. And again, you've got a captive audience, literally, but thankfully,
yeah, I mean, that
makes it easier.
People in comics, so many people in comics and so many on the creative side and the publishing side, I've been listening to people for my entire life complain about the direct market and comic stores and how every store is different and you can't figure out what book is going to be a hit where or all, and how, you wish there was some uniform standard or some big chain of stores or any of that stuff. And I will tell you, the pandemic has shown me that like the direct market is, we've seen it go through so many upheavals. There was the black and white boom that almost, killed the market. There was the implosion in the 90s when, all the distributors went under and 80% of the market went away. But the fact that the comic stores are all these small businesses, and some of them have chains of 5 or 8 stores if they're, some of the bigger ones, but they're all still these small businesses run by people who love what they're doing, who really care about this industry, and who have built these audiences that come into their stores even during this pandemic. And I think when we all thought the market was going to be completely gone in those 3 months when it was shut down and everyone was afraid their comic store was going to go out of business, I think that was really a gift to the industry in a way, because I've talked to a lot of people who say they go to their comic store now and there's 10 times as many people there as there used to be there, that everyone had just started to take it for granted. But, if some big comics chain stores like Borders or Barnes and Noble had come along and look at what Borders and Barnes and Noble did to the book market in America. It used to be a thriving, independent bookstore market. And you're seeing it coming back more now. The places that are going to survive all this are going to be the ones that are like the independent book markets that don't have investors they have to answer to, that are just about people trying to keep their own business going. But look at the comics market. Now, this has turned out to be one of the better years for comics in the last 20 years. as far as like income goes for,
Totally.
and like, I could not believe the reaction that pulp was getting. And I was hearing from a lot of retailers about it. And, we didn't have enough book plates. And for Reckless, like one of the things that we do, because we can't do, like Sean's in England, I'm over here, we can't do a lot of signings and book tours, especially with our schedule. Like doing a book tour we wouldn't be able to put out the next book on time. So we offer like these book plates to retailers. Any retailer that orders beyond a certain amount can order, book plates for every like 20 units that they order. And, we anticipated that we'd have higher demand this time. So we signed like 30% more than we'd ever done before. And we could have printed 2,500 more. Like we didn't have enough. And I couldn't believe it. I was
That's
like,
amazing.
Holy crap. Like, because it's like you can get an autographed book, and that's all the comic stores, doing that. That's all the comic stores supporting the stuff and building this audience. And it's like, had there been a Borders for comics or Barnes and Noble for comics, we wouldn't have a comic market right now, because when the pandemic hit, all those stores would have gone bankrupt, or like during any of the previous like boom bust times, they would have shut down like Borders did. And Borders almost took out some comic publishers because they were ordering heavy on graphic novels. A lot of comic publishers were hurt by that. Like that was one of those moments where I was glad that they had never ordered any of my books. But so it's like comics, the comics market is really lucky that it's a really strange collection of independent booksellers, and they're all evolving. They're all learning to deal with this, especially this weird year where like DC, like basically just decided to, go, hey, if you want to order our books, now you have to order them through these other two distributors.
Interesting, dude.
Yeah.
Crazy stuff. You'll forgive me. I'm thrilled for you, buddy. And I'm glad that the bookstores are responding to you, the local shops, and that they're adapting and finding ways to get through this crazy time. And again, the good news is people like yourself are adapting and giving them good product to sell. So.
Yeah. I'm like one of those people too, where I was like so worried about my comic stores that I shop at, that like I was like calling and ordering like, what expensive book did I put off buying? And I was like, I got Secret Headquarters to get me that giant hardback 8-ball collection that had.
Oh, that's great.
Where they reproduced like they're all on the exact same paper that the comics were published on. It's almost like they found old copies of the comics and collected them, but I knew they couldn't have.
Sure.
But yeah, I was like, I don't know if I would have ever bought that, but I was like, I totally loved it, and I like read it straight through, and it was like a time machine back to the 80s.
No, I know what you mean, man. I'm living the freelance life, and I'm waiting on a couple big checks that are coming soon, and I'll be able to, before Christmas, hold my local shops in the same way and go, yeah, what big ticket item can I buy that'll, make me happy and help you guys out a little bit more.
That's funny. I always think about like the first check I ever got from DC was for the thing Eric Shanower and I did for Vertigo, the Prez Smells Like Teen President. It's like,
I loved that.
30 years ago or something.
Man.
I don't know. It was a long time ago. And I remember I got that check, and that was like the biggest check I'd ever gotten in my life, because it was for like a 68-page comic or something. And the first thing I did was go out and buy like an EC Comics like hardback set. I could never afford anything like that. I'm such a nerd. I still have the crime suspense stories. But that's always like now I'm like, that's like my Christmas wish list now is just like, what hardback comics collection do I not have?
That's awesome. That's fantastic, dude. Yeah. I'll let you go. I mean, all right. Again, I wanted to keep it under 2 hours.
Oh, thanks, man. Yeah.
Sure.
Oh, yeah.
Sure.
We've gone pretty close to it.
Pretty close to 2 hours. I'm sorry, buddy, but it's always a pleasure, dude. And all the best to you and your wife, and good holiday season. Hopefully, as best as we can have during this crazy time. Yeah. And I'll leave you alone until. So is Volume 2 of Reckless the next project, or is something?
Yeah, Friend of the Devil. Yeah, Friend of the Devil. We're almost done. That's the second book in the series, and that comes out in April. Actually.
Excellent.
So just 3.5 months between books, which is insane. We had lead time. We couldn't turn it around that fast. But I think the second book is actually, the first book, you're always trying to figure out what you're doing a little bit. Like what parts of the genre are we using? What parts are we changing? But the second book, I really felt like almost freer. Like, oh, I know this character now, and I know I can experiment more. And the third book, I'm already like about halfway done outlining it, so I can just go directly into it. And that one is completely different from the first two. Actually, it's like a complete, because I was like, you can't do a recurring character if everything they do is like the exact same kind of thing, So it's like the first one, it's like, who killed this girl? The second one, it's like searching for someone who's been missing for 10 years. And the third one, I was like, it's got to be a completely different kind of twist. And I came up with something that I was really happy with. And I don't want to spoil it, but it's definitely going to be almost more of like a pulp bad guy book than a good guy book, but still the good guy, bad guy.
Fair enough. Dude, I'm telling you, you've revitalized the men's adventure genre with Reckless. It's a lot of fun. And people are definitely going to be happy about this. And that's great, man. 3.5 months, we'll get volume 2. So keep up the good work. And the same goes with Friday. Friday, yeah. Pardon me. But man, always a pleasure, Ed. I thank you for your time as always, and good conversation.
All right, man. I'll talk to you soon.
It's funny. I will talk to Ed Brubaker, and usually before we start the conversation, it's like, hey, can we try to make it not 2 hours? But we can't help it. Ed goes on a tear. I'm not going to interrupt. I want to hear what he has to say. And when we wind up, it usually is still around 2 hours. So apologies to Ed. I promised I wouldn't bug him until the spring when Volume 2 of Reckless comes out. But can't recommend this book enough, folks. I'm telling you, really entertaining. If you like what Brubaker and Phillips do, and my guess is you do because that's why you're listening to this conversation, you will not be disappointed. Reckless is another great book in the Brubaker-Phillips library, and very worthy of being on your shelf as soon as you decide to pick it up. Thanks a lot for listening today. More great conversations coming from Word Balloon this week. Brian Volk-Weiss, the man behind the toys that made us, the movies that made us, now has the holiday movies that made us on Netflix, and his new series is going into Season 2, A Toy Store Near You, which started on Amazon and YouTube and continues now with Season 2. Season 2 drops on Christmas Day, and it's a really great look at how the toy shops that represent small businesses are dealing with the COVID crisis. But as Brian promises, this time it's a lot more about the toys and a lot less about the hardship that all these stores are facing. And he has picked some incredible stores, and it's really fun to see their wares and hear their individual toy stories. And God, you can shop at these stores online. That's, of course, the beauty of 21st century shopping. Even the brick and mortar stores are managing to survive with that kind of sales model. So Brian Volk-Weiss, expect a conversation with him tomorrow on Word Balloon. Word Balloon is brought to you by the League of Word Balloon listeners. Thank you greatly, League, for your support via Patreon, patreon.com/wordballoon. Subscribing to Word Balloon really helps out the show. It allows me to innovate as I've been doing this year, creating the video channel on YouTube, and this has really helped me out in keeping the lights on here at wordballoon.com. Word Balloon is free. It'll always be free. But if you want to help out the cause, consider subscribing to Word Balloon via Patreon, patreon.com. Word Balloon is also brought to you by Aftershock Comics. It is celebrating the work of Cullen Bunn this month. All My Little Demons is a Cullen Bunn omnibus collecting a lot of his great creator-owned work that he has put together for Aftershock Comics, including the Brothers Dracul, the full series. There's Dark Ark After the Flood 1 through 5, Knights Temporal 1 through 5, Unholy Grail 1 through 5, the original graphic novel Witchhammer, Bloodlines from Shock Volume 1, and Man, I Am Evil, Dude, from Shock Volume 2. Lots of great supernatural stories from Cullen Bunn, great creator-owned stuff from Aftershock Comics, and not only that, but also great series that are underway, things like Kaiju Score. We've got the second issue of that coming out at the end of the month. Sympathy for No Devils from Brandon Thomas also coming out at the end of the month, December 30th. And just underway, great books like the Spy series from Stephanie Phillips, Red Atlantis, and the graphic novel Kill a Man from Steve Orlando, Philip Kennedy, and Al Morgan. Don't forget, you can find great books At Aftershock Comics, you'll find amazing genre-bending ideas from some of the top creators out there. Check it out for yourself. Go to their website, aftershockcomics.com. Thanks a lot for listening. Until next time, Word Balloon is a copyright feature of Shaky Productions. Copyright 2020. Stay safe, stay happy, stay healthy.